speak, and you're incredibly eloquent and forceful. You've got some very strong views. I want to know what you think about vaccines and the industry speak around vaccines, and if you question the safety or efficacy of vaccines, what does that mean about you?
If you take a large step back, almost think like you're the astronaut on the moon looking back at Earth. You know, if you're on Earth, you see all the wars and all the conflict and all these little things that different people have these micro interests. But I remember the astronauts taking a step back and seeing the Earth from a distance and saying, wow, how could all those things exist? It's kind of more of a unified look. I think in a sense, and I'll answer this more from the point of view as a husband, as a parent, as somebody, why should somebody be interested in this? Because the stakes are very high, and you've got a lot of money, you know, that's at stake, and a lot of political power, muscle that's behind it, etc. And it's out of the realm of the average worker, the average human being, the average parent, where they go to work every day, they want to just, you know, go on with their jobs, they want to love their spouse, they want to take care of their children, and do all the things that they think are right. It's impossible to become an expert at everything. And then there's these forces at play that try to say, here's what you need to do to be a good parent. So what's the commonality here? I'll tell you what it is, at least in my mind, what I think it is in a big way, and why I think any parent, any person who might consider themselves outside of the realm of these issues, why they should care. If you're talking about vaccines, you're putting them into your body. This is the most personal thing in the world, and I don't think people understand that. When you are an individual human being, or if you're a parent responsible for little human beings trying to grow up to become big human beings, it's a big issue to decide what's going inside this thing. Because the decisions you make there are critical life and death decisions. You know, if you're trying to guide your child along the way and say, oh, you know what, I think you should participate in sports, or I think maybe you should take certain courses or go for advanced placement courses in high school to get into a better college. You're trying to gear them towards a better life, a better future. Well, let me tell you, when you're talking about putting things inside their body, you're talking about the very same subject. So my hope is that quote-unquote average people, or people who are not experts in these realms that are interviewed here, would still understand that all of this has to do with you as an individual, with the other little individual beings that you're responsible for. And what are we asking for? Are we trying to be totally polemic? Are we trying just to say that there's evil people in the world, there's villains and there's victims? And certainly we can make arguments for that, but in the end, what are we really asking for? We're asking for people who are going to inject toxins into our body, or what I would perceive as toxins, into a body, and do it really under the force of law in many respects, to just, you know, let me have the choice if I want to have that done to my child or have that done to myself. That's where it starts. Now, it can escalate from there, and I think like people like me, and why other people have gotten involved, is because when they try to force this on you, without either unwittingly seeing you don't know, or force it saying you can't go to school or you can't go to work unless you get these shots, there's a point in time where you say, well, you know what, maybe I'm going to take a keener interest in this now because this is coming into my body. This is coming into my child's body. So ultimately, yeah, this is about personal space. This is about human rights in my mind. These are about some of the most fundamental issues that affect human beings, and I believe that these macro issues that we're talking about all relate to those particular things.
Well, the industry says, you know, the talking points to somebody like you would be that you must be anti-science. I mean, if you don't want to vaccinate your kids.
First of all, I'm not anti-science. You know, as a matter of fact, I'm a pretty big fan of science. But when I get into public debates in these issues, the questions they hate is, well, how do you define science and what do you accept as evidence? And as soon as we go down that trail, it leads to problems. Secondly, let's assume I am anti-science. If I'm anti-science, does that still mean that I have to inject things into my body against my will or my children's? That's a human rights issue. That has nothing to do with science. I mean, we can debate the science all day long. Are vaccines good? Are they bad? There's two sides of the argument. I've drawn my conclusions. Other people will oppose my conclusions. That's okay. Then they can choose to get injected and I can choose not to. But what does it mean when science becomes fascism? What does it mean that when people who purportedly say that my science is right and yours is wrong, and as a result I can violate your rights under the banner of science? What do they call that politically? That's referred to as fascism. That's totalitarianism. That is not freedom of individual rights, which are supposed to be guaranteed. So anybody who tries to proclaim that they're omniscient, that they know the truth, that it's conclusive, and that there's nothing else to be known about it and nothing else to be questioned, those are scary people to me. So people who have real wisdom understand what is maybe considered conclusive or factual, but also that there's also some open issues that are not so conclusive and factual, and that nobody knows everything. It's an issue of individual rights. I don't know that there's all these horrible villains that have malevolent intent and want to really hurt you and they're after you and they're out to get me. That's not what we're saying here. It's really an issue, it's a moral issue that has to do with, can I make the choice as to what happens to my body? Or can I be compelled to have to put things into my body against my will or do it unwittingly because it's not labeled? So to me, I mean, I don't know what you call that. And I'd ask anybody, what do you call it when somebody wants to force you to inject your child with something, whether you want to do it or not? I don't know what you might call it. To me, it's a form of fascism. It's a form of totalitarianism. It's a moral application to a public policy that leads to people being either unwittingly or forced to do something that they otherwise might not want to do. So I don't know what people call that. But to me, it's something that's a violation. It's the antithesis of individual rights and domain over your health freedom. If we went out there into the world, if we went to scientists who think that this stuff is good and we said to them, do you think freedom is a good thing or a bad thing? Do you think individual rights are a good thing or a bad thing? I suspect the majority of them would think it's a good thing. But how can you throw that out the door when it comes to saying, but when it comes to vaccinations, forget those rights. You must be compelled to do this because we know better than you.
Well, I mean, their argument is that you're saving lives if you yourself get vaccinated, because the only way the vaccines work is that if everyone gets them, right? So they're saying that you're actually ethically compelled. You're compelled ethically to get these vaccinations or to give them to your children, because otherwise you're responsible for deaths.
So let's look at the moral issue here again. So are you saying that individuals can be sacrificed for the greater good? That's what that's saying. That's the difference between communism, where there are no individual rights. Your life as an individual can and will be sacrificed for the greater good around you. Or are you saying, you know what, each individual should have their own rights to their own life, their own liberty, and their own pursuit of happiness? They get to choose. A government or any other authority should not be able to compel that person to do something that is potentially harmful to them for the greater good of other people. So you're asking the moral question, which is what it all boils down to. Should it be that governments can compel people to sacrifice themselves or their children for a purported greater good, which incidentally I don't agree that that's a greater good? Or should individual parents and individual people be able to make these choices themselves? That's the moral question. I believe in individual rights.
Well, the interesting point is that I actually don't even believe that vaccines are mandated in China, and I don't think they were mandated in communist Russia, but that's another point altogether anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so now that's a real irony, isn't it?
It is, it really is. Yeah. And in most socialized countries, I don't think they're mandated either. They're highly recommended.
What has to happen, and which is why I'm thrilled to be sitting here talking to you right now, there's only one solution to this, and that is a groundswell of the citizenry that becomes aware of what's being done. There's a revolution. And now, do I mean like there's got to be arms and it's got to be a militant revolution? No. It can just be a moral revolution. It can be people just voting by their behaviors and actions, and all kinds of other ways that it's happened in the past. And in today's culture, those types of revolutions, which is an information revolution, can emerge and have profound effects in changing things. And that's what I'd really like to see happen. I mean, I could sit here all I want and point fingers and be upset at the circumstance, which I am. And I find myself at moments in time distraught in a psychological crisis, basically, because I can see clearly some things that are just plain wrong, and that and what hangs in the balance are lives, real people. But I also have a lot of confidence in humanity still. And I want to see that the masses of people who are the potential victims of what's going on decide that they no longer want to play that role.
You know, these companies that we're talking